There's few other NBA dynasties which forever live on, and especially as time goes on, stays in our hearts and in our minds and memories, like the Chicago Bulls of the 1990s. But how did they win their first championship? Today, we're going to be talking about the 1991 Chicago Bulls. The history of the Chicago Bulls isn't that much different than other franchises. Throughout the history of the league, the Boston Celtics in the East, the Los Angeles Lakers in the West dominated championships, especially in a decade like the 1980s. So, when the Bulls selected Michael Jordan in 1984, many people felt that he was going to be the greatest player of all time, a transcending star from North Carolina. The sky was the limit for this young shooting guard. He came into the Bulls, and although he didn't make an immediate impact, the Bulls didn't win anything right away in the 84-85 season, just narrowly making the playoffs. But Michael Jordan would lead the Chicago Bulls all through the late 80s. As the 1980s would go on, Jordan would rack up mind-boggling numbers. In 1986, for example, in the first round opening series against the Boston Celtics, which Michael Jordan only played 18 games that season because of injury, he came back in the playoffs, played Boston, and in Game 2, he scored 63 points against one of the most legendary defensive teams of all time. Michael Jordan would average 43 points per game for that series, which the opposing player on the Celtics, Larry Bird, would describe Jordan as God in disguise. That wasn't Michael Jordan. But the Bulls could never get out of the first round. In 87, for example, they would lose to Boston again. But by 88, they started to get a better core around them. They had young guys like Scottie Pippen, young guys like Charles Oakley, Horace Grant. This young core would be their future to come. In 1988, Michael Jordan won his first MVP. And on top of that, he won his first Defensive Player of the Year. The Bulls looked like they were finally about to take the East by storm, maybe make the finals. And as I said, Jordan wasn't alone by now. He had a young Scottie Pippen. Although Pippen wasn't making an immediate impact, 7 points per game, it was his defensive ability that stood out. And you could tell this young team had a bright future, even if the young stars weren't necessarily there yet with their full potential. But in the East, there was an up-and-comer in the Detroit Pistons. And in 1988, the Pistons and the Bulls met each other for the first time in the second round. Jordan's first time coming out of the first round, he defeated the Cleveland Cavaliers, but the Pistons would defeat him in 5. This would start the rivalry between the Pistons and the Bulls. 89. The Bulls would make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, losing in 6 games to the Detroit Pistons, who would go on to win the championship. But through this, his teammates would step up more. Yes, they lost Charles Oakley, but they still had Michael Jordan, Horace Grant, and Scottie Pippen. This looked to be the trio that was going to win a championship. Now, changes were coming in the front office, not just on their roster. And in 1989-90, they hired Phil Jackson, who was a former player who played for the New York Knicks. Maybe not who you think of when you think of basketball players of the 1970s. He's not as remembered for his playing. But although today he's considered one of the greatest coaches of all time, some people will say him, some people will say Greg Popovich. He has the most championships as a coach in NBA history. Now, he would turn this team around somewhat. He would get Jordan to trust his teammates more, pass more. Jordan, instead of averaging 35 points per game or 37 points per game, he would average in the 30 to 33 range, passing more, 6.3 assists, 2.8 steals. By then, Scottie Pippen was taking his own leap. 16.5 points, 6.7 rebounds, 5.4 assists, 2.6 steals, 1.2 blocks. Horace Grant, 1.2 steals, 1.1 blocks. This team was bound to make a finals. So the Eastern Conference Finals in 89, 90, they go all the way to a Game 7. And what happens? Jordan shows up, obviously. He has a pretty good game, 31 points, 8 rebounds, 9 assists. The usual Jordan stat line which you would expect. Although the rest of his team would never step up in that game. Scottie Pippen, who was suffering from migraines, went 1 of 10. Horace Grant, 3 of 17. Altogether, the team shot 31%. The Pistons would beat them 93-74. And the Pistons would go on and win the NBA championship. Now, in that summer, the Chicago Bulls were ready to take that next step. This is the story of the 1991 Chicago Bulls. Despite the Bulls' rough start of 0-3, losing their first 3 games of the season, they later went on an 11-game win streak between February and March, then a 9-game win streak also in March, to finish in first place in the Eastern Conference with a 61-21 record, surpassing the team's best record in 71-72. The Bulls had the team's best offensive rating in the whole league and the 7th best defensive rating in the NBA. Now, right there with them in that Eastern Conference, the Celtics. Right around All-Star break, the Celtics had a really good record. The Pistons were still there. The Lakers were still there. So some of the 80s legends were still looming. But everyone kind of knew the 90s Bulls were the team of the future as the Celtics were aging, as the Lakers were aging. The Pistons, although in recent times there's been this revisionist history where they say the Pistons got old, that's why the Bulls won. But the Pistons core was actually around the same age as the Chicago Bulls. So what happened that season? They defeated the New York Knicks in the first round, 3-0. The second round, they faced Charles Barkley and the Philadelphia 76ers, defeating them in 5 games. Then, they went to the Eastern Conference Finals, again against the Detroit Pistons. This time, it was different. The Bulls swept them 4-0. And in that Game 4, the Pistons walked off. They didn't shake the Bulls' hand. Now, they were officially in the finals against the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers, who in the 80s had won 5 championships, led by Magic Johnson and James Worthy. This team, in some people's eyes, were the favorites to win, not the Bulls. The reason was because the Lakers had a lot of experience, the Bulls did not. And in Game 1, the Lakers actually won 93-91. So this kind of persuaded people to think the Bulls are just over their head. They're not going to be able to win the series. But Game 2, the Bulls win 107-86. Game 3, the Bulls win 104-96. Game 4, the Bulls win 97-82. Game 5, the Bulls win 108-101. Jordan had one of his best finals runs of all time. He averaged 31.2 points per game, 6.6 rebounds, 11.4 assists. Yes, the guy who you've always been told was only a scorer averaged 11.4 assists. Also, he averaged 2.8 steals and 1.4 blocks. He almost had as many assists per game as Magic Johnson. Scottie Pippen was second in scoring, 20.8 points per game, 9.4 rebounds, 2.4 steals, 6.6 assists. Horace Grant was their best post defender. 7.8 rebounds per game. They had good shooters like John Paxson, Craig Hodges, B.J. Armstrong. They had good interior defense in Horace Grant and Bill Cartwright. But most of all, they had Michael Jordan, who's now officially a champion. After all those years of being in the league, he's officially a champion. This would later go on to be the Bulls dynasty. They would win 6 championships in the 90s, and they might have won more championships had Jordan not retired. But in my opinion, this was Jordan at his best. Some people will say 96. I think his team was better in 96, but Jordan himself was better in 91. This was the pinnacle of Jordan. This was Jordan at his absolute peak. This was Scottie Pippen, not really arrived yet, but a great second star. This team could kill you on defense, but at the same time, Jordan was much more efficient at scoring than he was later. I'm not saying Jordan was a bad scorer in 96, 97, 98, but Jordan's field goal shooting kind of dipped as he got older. This was the best offensive Jordan, I think. A 53% field goal shooter. And this is his athletic pride. He's a good playmaker, a good defender. So where do I rank the 91 Bulls? With all these videos I try to rank these legendary teams. To me, it's hard. I've said I think the 96 Bulls are the best team of all time. The 17 Warriors were up there. 72 Lakers, 71 Bucks. To me, the 91 Bulls aren't quite to that level. Just because their supporting cast wasn't as strong as what the later Bulls would be. But this was an amazing playoff run. Look at how many Hall of Famers Jordan and the Bulls defeated. First round, they defeated Patrick Ewing. Second round, Charles Barkley. Third round, Eastern Conference Finals, the bad boy Detroit Pistons. And then, in the finals, Magic Johnson and the Lakers. Although you can make the argument that it wasn't a fair series because James Worthy was hurt in that finals series. But, injuries are always part of the game. You can't really put an asterisk on it. Part of winning a title is health and sometimes luck, because the teams that are the luckiest are the ones that usually win. It takes a lot to be healthy, Some guys are just injury prone and they're not able to win. But that's the story of the 1991 Chicago Bulls. What are your thoughts down below? Thanks for watching.